Ethan, they say truth stands the test of time, yet certain truths are so dangerous they don't just fade. They're buried deep beneath layers of convenient morality and societal falsehoods. No one understood this more acutely than Friedrich Nietzsche. You know him, the philosopher who declared the death of God, the man who chose madness over conformity, the thinker who challenged every cornerstone of Western civilization. But what you likely never heard is what he truly believed about women, about the nature of desire, about the eternal dance between the masculine and feminine, because it was systematically erased from the annals of history. Ask yourself, why is Nietzsche portrayed as a resentful recluse, descending into solitude and madness? Why aren't you told that he saw women as a force not merely of seduction, but of creative destruction? Why do scholars mention his critique of Christian morality, but omit his most brutal observations on feminine nature? Because books mention his philosophy of the overman, but skip his warnings about how men destroy themselves on the altar of romantic love. The truth is, Nietzsche wasn't a bitter misogynist, as they've led you to believe. He was relentless in his pursuit of authenticity, merciless in his analysis of human nature. And that authenticity came with a price few men are willing to pay. Nietzsche understood something about women, about power, about attraction, that men today are desperate to grasp but terrified to admit. But modern society has replaced raw truth with politically correct courtesy, brutal clarity with comforting confusion. And men are suffering a silent epidemic because of it. This isn't about hate. It's about clarity. This isn't about blaming women. It's about liberating men from the chains of their own illusions. What if the very things women say they want aren't what they actually respond to? What if modern men are systematically trained to fail in love, following rules never written for them, but against them? What if everything you were taught about being a good man is precisely what makes you invisible, forgettable, disposable? In this message, you'll uncover the ancient truth Nietzsche knew and why it so terrified the world that they buried it for centuries. If you're a man tired of being deceived, manipulated by a system that promises you love in exchange for your masculinity, this is your red pill. Prepare yourself, because once you see, you won't be able to close your eyes again. The lesson of Lou Andreas Salome. Most people don't know this, but Nietzsche loved deeply, and not just any woman, but Lou Andreas Salome, a Russian intellectual who became the living embodiment of everything he admired and feared about feminine power. Lou was no ordinary woman. She was brilliant, independent, seductive, manipulative, even ruthless when necessary. A woman who collected geniuses as others collect butterflies. According to all historical accounts, she was the type of woman who could bring the most powerful men to their knees. She had relationships with some of the most influential intellectuals of her era, Rilke, Freud, and of course, Nietzsche. But with Friedrich, she played the cruelest game of all. She led him to believe they could have a future together, allowed him to fantasize about a shared life, even posed for intimate photographs. Then, when he was utterly vulnerable, completely open, she rejected him publicly, brutally, mercilessly. And how did Nietzsche react? Here's the game-changing lesson. He didn't beg. He didn't grovel. He didn't pursue her like a wounded dog. He didn't write pathetic letters pleading for a second chance. He didn't become an emotional stalker. Instead, he did something most modern men would consider impossible. He completely withdrew. He retreated to the Swiss Alps, into absolute solitude, and transformed that agony into some of the most powerful works of Western philosophy. And that's the moment men completely miss. Nietzsche wasn't weak. He wasn't indifferent. He wasn't getting over the pain like a Buddhist monk. He was transmuting agony into power, observing his own suffering as a scientist studies an experiment, learning from every fiber of pain. He understood something we've completely forgotten in our era of therapy and emotional communication. To overcome the world, to become who you truly are, you must first overcome your desperate need for the woman. Not the romanticized version Hollywood sold you, but the real woman, with all her complexity, contradictions, and destructive power. And what did Nietzsche discover in those icy mountains, writing with numb fingers as his heart bled? That a woman's words frequently betray her deepest instincts. That her emotions can completely contradict her actions. That her conscious desire for security and stability doesn't always align with what truly excites her, consumes her, obsesses her. He lived this contradiction painfully, felt it in every fiber of his being, and never tried to solve it or control it, because Nietzsche knew something modern men have forgotten. Trying to tame a woman is how you lose your own wild soul in the process. Instead, he observed with the cold detachment of a surgeon, detaching himself with the Ethan. Like a seasoned warrior, he grew stronger with every blow. From that emotional tempest, that storm of pain and insight, he drew a single, profound conclusion that would forever reshape his understanding of the dynamics between men and women. Man must be trained for war and woman for the recreation of the warrior. This wasn't some primitive misogyny, as modern critics often claim. It was a coded warning, a biological truth veiled in metaphor. He wasn't advocating for physical dominance, but for energetic polarity, the eternal dance between strength and receptivity, between the conqueror and the one who is conquered. When a man endures the contradictions of a woman and doesn't break, doesn't devolve into an emotional supplicant, he transforms. He either becomes bitter and resentful, or he evolves into something more powerful, an overman. This was Nietzsche's true lesson, forged in the crucible of his own suffering. Women will test you. They will dissect you. They will push every boundary until they find your breaking point. What remains after that tempest, after that emotional hurricane, is who you truly are beneath all your social masks. He didn't whine like modern men. He didn't play the victim on internet forums. He didn't seek therapy to process his emotions. He used everything, every betrayal, every ache, every humiliation, as fuel for his will to power. Men today explain themselves endlessly, justify their existence pathetically, apologize for taking up space, and in the process, they lose the one thing women genuinely respect: their backbone. Nietzsche refused to play that degrading game. He chose solitude over emotional beggary. He chose creation over cheap comfort. He chose personal power over domestic tranquility. And that is precisely why modern academics want you to believe Nietzsche was merely a resentful madman with a mustache, writing from a place of spite. No. He was the man who faced the glorious, terrifying chaos of the feminine and emerged with an unbreakable will and an understanding most men will never achieve. Our contemporary culture cherishes the illusion of domestication between the sexes, not equality of worth, which is an entirely different concept, but of tameness, of emotional neutering. We are constantly bombarded with the message that men can be more attractive, more desirable, more successful in love if they become more like women, more emotionally expressive, more accommodating, more submissive, more in touch with their feminine side. They tell you to be vulnerable, to share your fears, to cry freely, to open yourself completely from the first encounter. They sell you the fantasy that constant emotional communication is the key to lasting love. They promise that if you are sensitive enough, understanding enough, available enough, she will choose you and keep you forever. Yet, look around. Men who follow this script religiously find themselves ignored, divorced, betrayed, or relegated to the status of best friend, while she fantasizes about the bad boy who treats her with indifference. They become free emotional support, the shoulder to cry on, the "you're so sweet, but" of their love lives. Nietzsche would have roared with laughter at this cosmic inversion, not out of cruelty, but because he saw through human self-deception with a clarity that cut like a scalpel. The great German philosopher knew that superficial words often conceal deeper, more primal, more honest instincts. And nothing is more hidden, more dangerous to ignore, more fundamental to understand than the unconscious will to power operating between man and woman. And the will to power is not misogyny, as the faint-hearted wish you to believe. It is pure magnetism. It is the force that moves the universe, that creates galaxies and destroys civilizations. It is what makes a woman feel butterflies in her stomach, or makes her dry up like the desert. A woman doesn't lose attraction to a man because he is gentle, good, or considerate. She loses it when his gentleness is packaged with neediness, when it masks a total absence of backbone, when it becomes a plea disguised as virtue. Nietzsche understood that true virtue, the arete of the ancient Greeks, meant excellence rooted in living according to your wildest, most authentic nature. And for a man, that nature doesn't whisper sweetly. It roars. It doesn't ask permission. It takes. It doesn't apologize for taking up space. It expands. You were not designed by millions of years of evolution to become what she consciously says she wants. You were forged to become what she unconsciously cannot resist, what she cannot control, what makes her feel small and feminine in comparison. This is the deadly paradox of female desire. Here is where most men crash into reality like a meteor into the atmosphere. She will say, with total sincerity, that she wants softness, vulnerability, immediate and complete access to your heart and soul. She will tell you she wants a man who communicates, who shares, who is emotionally available 24/7. She will tell you that strong, silent men are toxic, that traditional masculinity is dead, that the future belongs to sensitive men. But Ethan observes. He doesn't just listen. He watches what genuinely unfolds when you offer yourself too swiftly, too completely, too desperately. He sees her pull away, not physically at first, but energetically. He notices how her eyes dim, how her replies shorten, how she invents reasons to avoid seeing him. He observes how, in a mysterious twist, she's drawn to the man who treats her with indifference, who doesn't text back immediately, who has a life more significant than simply orbiting her. She retreats, not out of malice or manipulation, but because her instincts are relentless, more ancient than civilization, more potent than her conscious thoughts. Nature spent millions of years programming her biology to test strength, not softness, to seek grounding, not romantic pleas, to respond to confidence, not neediness disguised as affection. Friedrich Nietzsche asserted that desire, especially eros in all its destructive splendor, wasn't about logic. It was about the will to power in its rawest, most primitive form. A will that unmasks who you truly are when stripped of all social veneers, all civilized pretenses, all the self-deceptions you cling to about your identity. And what is more revealing, more pathetic, more detrimental to attraction than a man desperate for validation from the very woman he's supposedly leading? It's like a general seeking permission from his soldiers to issue commands. It's like a king begging approval from his subjects. It's the complete inversion of the natural order, and she senses it in her bones, even if she can't articulate it consciously. Masculine and feminine energies are not interchangeable, no matter what gender ideologues tell you. They are complementary, yet fundamentally distinct. One penetrates, one receives, one constructs frameworks, one nourishes life within those frameworks. One maintains stillness and direction, the other flows and adapts. One leads, the other follows. And when these roles are reversed, the polarity collapses like a shattered magnetic field. This is why being a nice guy isn't enough. Not if your kindness is bought with self-effacement. Not if your gentleness is a ploy for approval. Not if your consideration stems from a fear of conflict rather than genuine inner strength. Women aren't drawn to submission veiled as virtue. They are drawn to conviction, to certainty, to a presence that needs no explanation or justification. The lost art of masculine presence. Friedrich Nietzsche once penned what might be the most crucial line for any man seeking to understand his own power. Become who you are. But how many men today genuinely know who they are beneath all the societal expectations, all the feminine demands, all the pressures to conform? Most modern men only know how to adjust, how to become less threatening, more agreeable, more palatable for female consumption. They know how to soften their edges, how to apologize for their nature, how to make women feel safe at the cost of making themselves invisible. And in doing this, in betraying their own essence, they become utterly forgettable. Because here is the truth no one will tell you. You cannot lead a woman when you are chasing her like a lost puppy. You cannot inspire respect when your entire life revolves around her approval. You cannot create attraction when you have abandoned everything that makes you unique in a desperate attempt to be what you imagine she desires. The men women genuinely admire, the ones who obsess them, the ones who make them fill their diaries and fantasize for years, do not orbit them like desperate planets. They remain rooted in something grander than any individual woman, a mission, a personal code, a truth that transcends romantic drama. That is what gives a man his true advantage in the game of love. Not calculated cruelty, but unshakable clarity. Not manipulation, but an authenticity so potent it requires no explanation. He doesn't bend for emotional comfort, nor does he sacrifice his principles for domestic peace. Instead, he cultivates natural tension, not through conscious manipulation, but because tension is the sacred space where attraction truly lives and breathes. You were taught to become more safe for women, to earn their trust by being predictable, available, harmless. But paradoxically, safety without challenge breeds deadly boredom, and boredom is the slow but certain death of desire. This is the polarity that Friedrich Nietzsche understood, the uncomfortable, undeniable biological truth our ancestors knew instinctively, but which we have forgotten in our haste to be civilized. And Friedrich Nietzsche didn't whisper these truths through gentle metaphors. He bellowed them through aphorisms that cut like swords, through observations so brutally honest that most people prefer to ignore them. Not all men can handle this truth, but those who can, those who possess the courage to stare reality down without flinching, stop chasing feminine approval, and begin becoming the kind of man women want to chase. The deadly language of feminine contradictions. Here is a truth so brutal that most men would rather live in denial than confront it. Most men still take a woman's words at face value, as if they were legal contracts instead of expressions of temporary emotional states. She says, tears welling in her eyes, with absolute sincerity in her voice, that she wants a good guy, someone emotionally present, someone who communicates openly about their feelings. She's tired of bad boys, of men who treat her poorly, of masculine toxicity. She just wants someone to love her, respect her, treat her like a princess. So the modern man, trained from childhood to be accommodating, does exactly as he's told. He becomes sensitive, open, emotionally available 24/7. He inundates her with communication, listens to her every problem for hours, makes her the absolute center of his universe. He becomes her personal therapist, her best friend, her unconditional emotional support. And what does he get in return for all this devotion? Silence, confusion, excuses. I need space. It's not the right time. You're too good for me. Or worse, total abandonment as she leaves for the guy who treats her with indifference, who doesn't respond to her texts, who has more important things to do than adore her. Look, the modern man forgot what Friedrich Nietzsche never forgot, what he etched into his soul through pain. Human beings lie to themselves first, then they lie to others, not always with bad intentions, but because we genuinely don't understand our own contradictory, primitive nature. A woman can sincerely believe, with every fiber of her conscious being, that she wants comfort, emotional security, and total transparency. But on a deeper level, in the realm of instincts operating below the radar of consciousness, what she truly desires is something else entirely. Contrast, masculine tension, mystery, a presence she can't completely control or predict. She wants a man she can't read like an open book, whom she can't manipulate with tears or drama, who has a life so rich and a purpose so strong that she becomes a beautiful, but not essential addition to his existence. Because once she can predict you completely, once she can control you emotionally, once she knows you'll do anything to keep her happy, desire dies a slow but inexorable death. The Unforgettable Man. Anatomy of Female Obsession. Let's ask the question every man secretly fears, the question that keeps him awake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling and wondering what he did wrong. Why did she forget you so quickly? Why did you go from being the center of her world to being completely invisible in a matter of days or weeks? You remember every moment. You opened your heart like never before. You were there at her worst, when no one else cared. You shared your deepest dreams, your darkest fears, your most vulnerable hopes. You gave her total access to your soul. She said things you imprinted on your memory like sacred mantras. You're the only one who understands me. I've never felt this way with anyone. I can't imagine my life without you. Then, like a switch being flipped, everything changed. Days or weeks later, it's as if she never knew you. She's posting photos with a new man, laughing louder than she ever laughed with you, glowing with an energy you never saw when you were together. You feel discarded like emotional trash, as if all your love, all your devotion, all your authenticity was completely invisible. But here's what Friedrich Nietzsche would have told you, what he would have carved into your forehead if necessary. You weren't forgotten because you weren't good enough. You weren't replaced because you weren't attractive, rich, or interesting enough. You were forgotten because you were too predictable, too available, too easy to get and to keep. Let that burn in your soul until you fully grasp the lesson. You gave your entire self too early, too completely, too desperately. Your emotions, your attention, your time, your energy, your soul. It was all handed over without her having to do anything to earn it. You thought such generosity would win eternal loyalty. But in reality, it killed the tension that keeps desire alive. It collapsed the polarity that creates magnetic attraction. You became too known, too safe, too available. You eliminated all mystery, all challenge, all uncertainty. You became a book she had already read completely. A song she had heard so many times that it no longer evoked any emotion. Women don't fall in love with men who emotionally collapse onto them like demolished buildings. They fall in love with men who challenge them to rise, who make them work for their attention, who keep a part of themselves always slightly out of reach. The lasting mark. The man she never forgets. Now let's talk about the men women never forget. Those who become the standard against which they measure everyone else. Those they obsess over years later, even decades later, even when they're married to other men. These men are not always the most physically attractive. They are not always the richest or most successful. They are not always the most romantic or the ones who say the sweetest words. But they all share certain characteristics that make them absolutely unforgettable. that etched them into the female psyche like firebrands. They were the ones who wore mystery like a second skin, who had a backbone of steel beneath any superficial softness, who could walk away and truly meant it. They were men who, they didn't constantly explain themselves, didn't ask permission to exist, didn't apologize for taking up space in the world. Because here lies the paradox most men never grasp, the truth Friedrich Nietzsche understood down to his bones. The man who doesn't need her is precisely the one she needs most. Not because he's arrogant or cruel, but because he is genuinely self-possessed. His validation stems from his life's mission, not from her approval. His happiness depends on his personal growth, not her mood. His identity is rooted in something deeper than any romantic connection. She becomes a witness to his life, not its gravitational center. And in witnessing his depth, his discipline, his unwavering refusal to bend to emotional pressure, she feels something most modern women rarely experience: genuine respect. And if she doesn't respect you, nothing else truly matters. Love without respect is merely neurotic attachment. Affection without respect won't endure beyond the first real crisis. Sex without respect will morph into an obligation met with growing resentment. She'll either leave entirely, or worse, she'll remain physically while withdrawing emotionally, transforming the relationship into a prison for both. The invisible scent of desperation. There's a terrifying truth most men refuse to acknowledge, something they'd rather ignore than confront. Women can smell emotional desperation like animals scent fear. It's not your cologne they detect. It's not your sweat or your breath. It's something far more subtle and profoundly revealing. They can smell when you've lost yourself in the pursuit of their approval. You can flash the most convincing smile. You can say all the right things, wear the perfect clothes, hit the gym, shave impeccably, use the most expensive cologne. You can act confident, speak with authority, even succeed in other areas of your life. But if deep down, at the core of your being, your soul feels hollow, because you've traded your authenticity for the dream of being chosen by her, she will know. Women are biologically and psychologically attuned to perceive emotional incongruence with terrifying precision. It's a survival mechanism developed over millions of years of evolution. If what you say doesn't align with what you truly believe, if your external posture conceals internal desperation, if your kindness is conditional and calculated, she won't need to consciously analyze it. She will simply feel a repulsion she can't even rationally explain. She'll pull away without knowing exactly why. Because on some primitive, instinctive level, she knows you're no longer a complete man. You've become an emotional mirror begging to be filled by her reflection. An emptiness disguised as a person. A walking, talking need. And that repulsion isn't cruelty on her part. It's biological wisdom. It's her internal navigation system protecting her from investing emotional energy in someone who has abandoned their own sovereignty. Because a woman cannot respect a man who doesn't respect himself. And without respect, everything else is just romantic theater destined for failure. The return to savage truth. If this message felt like a punch to the gut, if you recognized your own story in these words, if you felt it because you've lived it firsthand, then this is your moment of awakening. Don't wait for yourself. Don't seek more excuses. Don't take refuge in the comfort of blaming women, society, or circumstances. It is your job, your sacred responsibility, not to be what she says she wants. It is your mission to become what you truly are. Fully, dangerously, without apology or explanation. The world will call you arrogant for reclaiming your space. Some women will call you insensitive for not bending to every emotional whim. Weak men will label you toxic for refusing to play the victimhood game. But the few, The very few women who recognize authentic masculinity when they see it will feel it in the deepest parts of their souls. They will sense that ancient vibration, that frequency their bodies were designed to recognize and respond to. And even if no one else sees it, even if the entire world is blind to your transformation, you will see it. You will feel it. You'll feel the return of your backbone, the quiet dignity of not needing to be chosen by anyone to validate your existence. You'll feel the strength that comes from being rooted in something grander than any romantic drama. You'll feel the peace that arises when you stop chasing and start attracting from your own completeness. And from that place of personal sovereignty, you don't pursue women like an addict chases their next fix. You don't chase approval like a beggar pursues coins. You become a force of nature, a magnetic field that attracts what resonates with your frequency and repels what doesn't belong in your life. You pull reality in your direction instead of being pulled by the emotional currents of others. Because now you know, with a certainty that cuts to the bone, what you tolerate becomes your prison. What you embody becomes your freedom. What you respect in yourself becomes what others respect in you. Friedrich Nietzsche warned us. Over a century ago, from the breathtaking Swiss Alps, a voice echoed into a world lost in comforting delusions. That voice, belonging to Friedrich Nietzsche, declared that humanity must rise beyond its current state, or be overwhelmed by powers it couldn't grasp. Yet, too many men today are merely performing a role, a script penned by a society that prefers them compliant, manageable, and ultimately, weak. They strive to please a system that secretly disdains them, playing the good guy in a drama where such characters often find themselves alone, clutching at a fragile illusion of love that shatters at the first touch of reality. They are weary, disoriented, and quietly bitter, silently questioning why nothing feels genuine, why their efforts fall flat, and why, despite following every rule, they still lost the game. The world doesn't need more complaints, more clamor, or more male victims lamenting the universe's unfairness. What it truly needs are men who can rediscover their true selves, shedding the layers of societal expectations. Men audacious enough to be genuinely authentic, inconveniently truthful, and unstoppable in their purpose. And now, at this very moment, as you absorb these words Friedrich Nietzsche himself would undoubtedly applaud. Perhaps a forgotten memory just resurfaced. Perhaps you've just shaken off a dream that was slowly draining your life away. Perhaps you've finally gathered the courage to stop conforming to what others demand and begin transforming into your authentic self. The real question isn't whether the world is prepared for your awakening. The crucial question is whether you are prepared for the world you will inevitably forge once you finally stand tall.